be a light for you in dark places when all other lights go out.
Hello, Hobbit Strategy Battle Gamers. Welcome to another episode of A Light in the Dark. And I'm DCHL Devin, and this show is here to talk to you about tactics, my ideas, anything I've come up with in my 14 years of playing the game, and anything my friends have come up with showing me how to play the game. I actually have a lot of advice from a lot of expert players, a lot of stuff that beginners have shown me, and I think this would be good for beginners to know. So today's episode, we're going to actually talk about siege weapons. Siege weapons are actually a pretty interesting weapon to use in combat, though a lot of people have trouble using them. A lot of times they won't make their points back unless you use them in a very specific way. And today I'd like to kind of cover that, to cover the way I've seen them used to best effect, and hopefully you might disagree, agree. Let me know in the comments below what you think of these ideas. So when we talk about siege weapons, we're going to go ahead and go one at a time. I'm going to cover every single siege weapon in the book. I'm going to cover how to beat them and also how to use them. The how to use them part's probably more interesting. How to beat them is quite simple. A lot of siege weapons have extremely obvious weaknesses. So the first weapon we're going to get to today is the Trebuchet by Gondor. The Trebuchet is actually the hardest Gondorian siege weapon to use. It has a minimum range, it is a high point cost, and really in the grand scheme of things doesn't do all that much damage. It does a strength 10 hit to the target. Well, first off, the Trebuchet is a weapon that does indirect fire. It lobs rocks over and into the enemy. It has an 18-inch minimum range, 96-inch maximum range. You'll probably never fire that far unless you're doing a very special type of match. You might see this weapon become kind of useful in contour matches and domination matches. The reason why is because, King of the Hills as well, the opponent is going to be off far away. This allows you to use your maximum range and your indirect fire to constantly hit and bombard the enemy, force them to move onto your terms, or get off of an objective. So it's not useless of any sort. It does a strength 10 hit to the target, strength 10 hit to the target, strength 5 hit to all the men in the area effect of it. And the strength 5 is okay. A lot of heavy armor units are going to withstand it, and by heavy armor I just mean strength 6 and up, which is really kind of common to be honest with you. I think that most units will need to be wounded on 5s and therefore probably won't be wounded at all, maybe about a third of the time. So, is this weapon really useful? It's definitely difficult. But the way you want to use it is kind of obvious when you look at its rules. You set it off to a back, into a corner, anything like that, and just out of the way. It can target anything that any of your models can see, so it doesn't need any type of line of sight, and you pretty much just lob rocks right into the enemy. Now, in domination and all those, it's pretty easy to see its use. In a to the death match, which is kind of the most standard way to play the game, we're talking about probably setting your whole army back. Now this is where Gondor comes into pretty good use. Madril is a unit in Gondor that adds +1 to your reinforcement rolls. Now, this does not specifically state that it does +1 to your deployment rolls. However, a lot of people play that way. So if you do play that way, you can deploy your men back and allow your men, well, they'll deploy back on a 3-up. Normally you need a 4-up and deploy anywhere on the field. Now they'll need a 3-up. However, some people do not interpret the rules this way. They only see the reinforcements rules happening in a Maelstrom of Battle style format, and that's fine. If you see it that way, another advantage that Gondor has, as well as Nor, is that it can put a lot of one-drop heroes in the field. It's got a lot of cheap heroes. You can kind of see where your enemy's deploying and then deploy accordingly. The reason I say this is because the Trebuchet can't fire once it's in 6 inches of your own models. So say your target is within 6 inches of your own models. And this is really the big problem of it, the fact that you cannot continuously to bombard the opponent. Now the cool part about this is technically everything they have is going to have to be within 6 inches of your men. If they have ring wraiths, spellcasters, or anything like that, or cavalry that are trying to flank you, your Trebuchet can continue to bombard. It may actually be a distraction. And this is what the Trebuchet is for. Now, it's a 100%, it's a high-costed Distraction is really what it is. Your opponent is going to be psychologically affected by this weapon. The thing is, let's say your opponent's playing Grey Company or Harad or an Archer Heavy Force. The Trebuchet, it's going to lose in a long-range duel against it. Their men will fire a bunch of arrows at you. You are Gondor. You're probably going to resist all their shots. And then your Trebuchet is going to drop Strength 5 rocks onto them. I understand it's Strength 10, but that's just the target. Strength 5 is really what they want to worry about. They're going to spread out. They're going to try to avoid these things. Or if anything, they're going to try to move towards you. So what the Trebuchet gives you is you pay a certain amount of points to get the opponent to move. And that is really what you want it there for. It is not for the damage it deals. It is for the psychological impact that it gives to the opponent. It makes them move differently than they really would previously. It makes them not be able to maneuver as much because they know they're just going to keep lobbing rocks. And remember, they can't move now fast units. One thing about the Trebuchet and any other weapon that scatters now, on a 1 through 5, if there's no other target to scatter onto, it just hits the original intended target. So, therefore, they won't move like guys like, let's say they're running around Radagast. Radagast the Brown on a sleigh is running around and he's trying to flank your guys. He's not going to be able to really do that because if he leaves him out by himself, that 12-inch move speed, he's going to end up getting hit by one of these rocks and it will be devastating. It is instant death. So they're not going to want to leave their guys out in the dark. Also, fell beasts have this problem too. Fell beasts and stuff like that, they like to fly around a lot. They're going to have to stay within 6 inches. 6 inches is awesome because what is 6 inches? It's charge range. So normally when, let's say, your enemy's cavalry models will stay 12 inches, I'm sorry, not 12 inches, but about 7 to 10 inches back in order to allow them to charge you, but you not to charge them. The Trebuchet doesn't really allow them to do that anymore. In a cavalry charge format, they're going to have their men kind of close together. Cavalry bases are huge, so they're not going to be able to really spread them out too much. Your Trebuchet is going to land rocks all over them. So that is the point of the Trebuchet. It's to get them to move, not to completely obliterate them. If you're obliterating your opponent with a Trebuchet, chances are your opponent didn't know too much of what they're doing against it. And so if you want to know what to do against Trebuchet, say you're really annoyed of it, that's pretty much what you got to do. You got to move in. You got to move in within 6 inches, move into the opponent's charge range, and get in their face so that the Trebuchet has to stop lobbing rocks. At a 500-point game or less, Trebuchet is way too big. It's too expensive to use, so don't try it. But at 800 to 1,000, 700 probably minimum, it's appropriate. You can use the weapon, and if you're lucky, you actually might get a nice hit on a Mumba Kill, which is a siege target, by the way, so you can hit it pretty accurately. But if not that, then a Balrog or Cave Drake or all the big guys, the nasty models that are kind of coming against you. So I don't think it's useless at all. I think the Trebuchet is an absolutely fantastic weapon if used correctly for your whole army. Your whole army needs to mesh around it. So if you're going to deploy your whole army back to allow the Trebuchet to fire and make your opponent move to you, then you want to deploy a lot of archers, a lot of guys who can take that charge. I mean, that's pretty much what you need. I think if you have a bombardment of archers shooting arrows at them, and then Trebuchets that are forcing them to move to you, because remember, their archers are going to lose that fight, you can really disrupt your opponent. Even like enemy crossbows, stuff like that, you can really cause them problems by simply having a Trebuchet in the back of the field that constantly destroys their archers. So that is how I have seen it best used. That's how I think it should be used, is to counter enemies plotting against you. So the next weapon we have is the Gondor Avenger Bolt Thrower. Now this weapon's actually kind of interesting. When I first saw it come out, I had actually never heard of it before. Not in the books, not in the movies, so I'm kind of wondering where it came from. But awesome job on GW to actually come up with it. If they didn't come up with it and Tolkien did, then just let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know where it actually came from. And the Avenger Bolt Thrower is basically the machine gun of the Lord of the Rings world. It rolls D6 amount of shots. Now personally, if you're going to spend if you're spending a certain amount of points, I can't say points values on these videos, Games Workshop will hate me. So if you're spending a certain amount of points on this, it's worth spending the extra to get Swift Reload. Swift Reload is an update, an upgrade that they get, which allows you to roll 2d6 and pick the highest. I personally use this every time. I think it is well worth the points. I think that where the points of a Swift Reloaded Avenger Bolt Thrower comes in, I think it's about appropriate and exactly what you want. Now, this weapon doesn't really make your opponent move to you. It doesn't have quite that psychological effect. This one, you really want to do the pinpoint targeting on their stuff. And what I like to do often is have your men kind of off in the middle and then the Avenger off to the side. Now, your opponent may try to charge it, which is fine. You've now just distracted a portion of their troops to come at your bolt throwers. Your bolt throwers will often get 2-3 rounds of shooting in. I actually have seen it where they are spammed up. We have actually one member of our community who spams bolt throwers, 2 to 3 of them, no joke, and will just mow through units. I mean, you're talking about 2d6, pick the highest. You're generally getting an average of 4, so let's say you're getting an average of 12 shots a turn. Now, granted, this is a huge amount of points, you're probably thinking. Okay, how do you even work that? Well, unless your opponent has a really big horde race, you're pretty much fine. Now, the best part about Gondor is it actually is a horde race. So, a lot of people think of Gondor as high costing or mid-range kind of costing unit. But because of Damrod and Baragond and actually Denethor, in my opinion, as well, you get really cheap heroes. You can bring in a really cheap amount of troops, a lot of cheap troops, and I'm sorry, well, they're mid-range troops, but they're coming in for pretty cheap because your opponent, where they're spending like so many points, you're spending like half that amount to bring in your warband. So a lot of times Gondor can hoard just as well as the rest of them. So you hoard a lot of troops, spam a bunch of Avengers, and just mow down your opponent as they're coming in. The best part about the Avengers, 3-inch scatter, so therefore they have to be even closer, even more in your face. And then you can just pick up the Avenger once they're all in your battle lines. You can't get your shots normally because it doesn't have indirect fire. You can go ahead and just move along the sides and fire. Just keep mowing down. I mean, honestly, I think personally the Avenger is the better weapon, the more straightforward weapon of siege weapons to use. I just think keep it off to the side. If you have a hill, use the hill. Perfect, but I'm kind of speaking on the terms where you don't have a terrain advantage automatically. Yes, if you have a tower, put it in the tower. I think it'll be awesome. Then your opponent will have to come to you. Now, here's the reason I don't say it has to come to you as much as, like, say, a trebuchet. If you have it in a tower or hill in the back, its range is only 24 inches, which means that it's not really going to be able to fire those really long distances. Let's say your army is about 6 inches ahead of the bolt thrower. That means your opponent only has to be about 18 inches ahead of your men. 18 inches is the average bow range, but generally if you're a good bow army, you have 24 inches, which means you can fire at your men. I'm sorry, they can fire at your men, but you can't fire back. Well, at least with the bolt thrower. I mean, if you have archers, then that's one thing. So, just something to consider. It has a really short range of 24 inches, but other than that, I think it's a fantastic weapon. I absolutely think it should be used. I think that if you're going to use this type of weapon, it has strength 7 hits, which is pretty decent enough to kill mountain trolls. And a lot of people, in my last video I showed, a lot of people don't really like trolls and monsters. Well, Avengers are a great way to get rid of them. They are kind of the monsters of the Gondorians, of men in general, since men don't have monsters at all. So, we go off of that, and we go into one of my personal favorites, the Demolition Team. Now, a lot of people feel that the Demolition Team is useless. We actually have a couple guys in our community who use Demolition Teams to a great effect. So, Demolition Teams are in the Isengard race. They are quite an amount of points, and that's where people have problems like, okay, how do you get your points back? Because it's one-time use. As soon as you use the weapon, it's gone. It blew up. You're done. So, the way you would do it is, Isengard is actually pretty popular to field Shamans in the race. Shamans is the first part of how I think these should work. In order to use the Demolition Team, your unit has to take a courage test, and it has to pass. You really don't want this failing, because this moment you try to use this thing, you need it to work. Okay, so you take away the points of failure. The Demolition Bomb has more points of failure than any other siege weapon. Now, this sounds like it should be terrible, but no. This weapon, in my opinion, works better than most any other siege weapon. So, the Demolition Bomb, the Isengard race, you have faction. The Isengard faction has about Isengard Shamans and Isengard Drummers. Isengard Drummers are another very common unit, and I think you should put these guys in, alright? Now, if you don't, the Demolition Bomb is still good. However, the drummers make them just a little bit better. The reason I say this, you keep the drummer behind your lines, all right? And as the lines are starting to come in, you notice that big juicy hero in the front ranks. Now, the opponent is measuring out 6 inches, which kind of makes sense. They kind of forgot about your drummer. Don't use it. Not yet. Then what you do is you use the drummer, you call the effect. The cool part about the drummer is you don't need your men to end within 6 inches of the drummer, unlike Heroic March. So you basically just send your bomb running forward. All right? Now, this is important. Wait till your opponent moves first. Do not do this on your priority step, otherwise we'll just surround your drum. There's a problem with that, and you'll see why in a second. All right, the drums, when your opponent has moved first, you send 2 sappers. All right, first off, buy flaming brands. They're only 1 point apiece. I know I can't say points in the video, but I highly doubt they'll care about that. It's just a weapon upgrade. They are only 1 point apiece, and you just attach them all to your men. All right, and then you send your 2 sappers, just 2, and then 1 other guy. It doesn't matter. It could be another sapper. It could be a berserker. Doesn't really matter because you have Fury casted with your shaman that you should have had. All right, and when they get to the front lines, your sappers should engage their front line. All right, right up as close as you can. Get the bomb as close as you possibly can to the front line without actually touching any of their unengaged models. Do not do that. Now remember, you can drop the bomb anywhere in base contact with your 2 sappers who are carrying it. So they carry it, drop it forward, you carry it in, whatever. But you want it as close as possible to their men. Then with the last guy remaining who is unengaged, you set off the bomb. Alright, you should pass automatically, you roll a dice, hope you don't get a 1. On a 1, that's another point of failure, it becomes a dud and you remove it. So that's really unfortunate. But if that happens, you do this at the start of the fight phase, your opponent is unable to react to it. When they call a heroic fight, let's say, to try to react to it, it doesn't matter. All a heroic fight does is, yeah, you call it in the beginning of the move phase, just like the bomb. The bomb detonates now in the beginning of the move phase. A lot of people remember it when, I'm sorry, not the move phase, the fight phase. It detonates in the middle of the beginning of the fight phase. A lot of people in the old rules remember the bomb being useless because the bomb detonated at the beginning of the move phase. So you had to set it down, or that was another problem. You picked it up one turn, but you couldn't set it down in the same turn. Well, now that's no longer the case. Okay, you can set it down in the exact same turn. So you set it down the next turn in the old rules, and then your opponent just demolished it the next turn. They could react to it, whatever. Now they can't react to it. The heroic fight happens in the beginning of the move phase. That's cool, call it. The heroic fight says its fight is resolved first. Great. So you go ahead and resolve your fight first, but we're not in fights yet. So you can't resolve any of them just yet. We're still at the beginning of the fight phase. So a heroic fight was called. Fantastic. Now, start of the fight phase, your bomb is started. Your bomb gets called. It blows up everything. Okay, so they can't get out of its way. If they moved first, and you have the drummers, then you moved a 9-inch threat range, you move it right in front of their unit, and you blow up everything in the area. Alright, like I said, this is not a huge investment. Shaman, you probably would have already had it. Drummer, probably would have already had it. Even if you don't have a drummer, the move still works. It just decreases you by 3 inches. Even if you couldn't, then heroic marches will fill the job. So it just call a heroic march, move your hero a little bit up, then move the rest. The only ones who should be dying are your 2 sappers and the guy who caused to light it. Okay, and that's about it. And if you get really, really good at it, you can probably just make only the 2 sappers. But just to be safe, take the other guy. The reason why is because the move phase is over and now you got the shoot phase. The shoot phase is another phase where the opponent can stop the bomb. Okay, so they can shoot it down, and if it ever gets wounded on a roll of 6, it detonates, self-detonates, but that's fine because it's already in place. But you don't want it to be destroyed. Even worse than that, you don't want your brand carriers to be destroyed because that's another point of failure. If the brand carrier is killed, or all of them are killed, then your guys have to do desperate detonations, which means they need to roll a 6 in order to detonate it. So this is what I think is the big balance of the bomb. The bomb is hard to stop. Once it's in the fight phase, you can't stop it anymore. You're done. Okay? But it is a 2-inch D6 wound blast radius. I mean, talk about making craters. This thing will make a huge one. Alright? In Lord of the Rings, 2 inches is a massive range. Alright? Especially when it's a diameter kind of effect. So, but once again, if anyone thinks, okay, oh my god, this combo is broken, it's not. You have to have men carry it to the front line, you have to protect it from archery, you got to protect the brand carriers, then you got to roll an opio and roll a 1. And this is the reason some people want to bring heroes to do it. I don't think you should unless you bring like a really cheap orc captain, but then you're investing more points. Don't do it. Just hope you don't roll a 1. I have not really rolled a 1. If you do, it's a really sad day. You're a huge point sink off. I understand that's kind of the risk you took, but a 1 is really, really rare. So if you're really worried about it, then detonate it with an orc captain then, or something cheap. So absolutely, I think that is an absolute worth strategy. I think the Demolition Bomb is good. I think it's easy to use, and it's not really that much of a points investment. If you blow up the right things, chances are you're taking out a hero or a troll or something big in the process. You should be taking out something big. If not, then you're taking out a phalanx worth of Urukai enemies or a phalanx worth of something that will make the amount of points it's worth. Do not deploy it against just average basic dudes. So let me move on from that. We're going to go ahead into the Ballista. Now, this is the Siege Assault Ballista from the Isengard army. I actually think this weapon's pretty good. It's actually kind of a mid-range, really cheap for kind of what it does. I think this is a fantastic weapon. It does a strength 9 hit to the target, has a long range, 3-inch scatter, so real easy to work with. So it actually combines the effects of the bolt thrower and the trebuchet. It gets your opponent to move toward you, which is awesome in an Isengard army, because if you have a crossbow list, then you can just wait for them to come to you, and you don't got to move, and you can just blast them with crossbows until they get to your face. Alright, so even if that, it also has the 2d6 piercing shot, which I think is pretty cool, actually. Probably won't get too many. The opponent will most likely, and this I actually recommend as a counter to siege weapons, the opponent will put men in the back. Alright, you separate the men, so like you have your main phalanx, and then you have men just behind them, dotted around. The reason for this is because if they scatter, which they most likely will because a 2 through 5 does so, or a 1 through 5, you just scatter the men in the back, and then they get flung 2d6 inches backward, which hits nothing. So the 2d6 rarely comes into play, and this actually, the counter for the siege weapons, I know you're probably thinking, okay, well, if they can just do that, why would they be scared of it? It's still a problem, because you have to drag off men. You have to really think about how you're dragging off men, and a lot of times if you're just sitting there firing, you're going to run into men to kind of self-sacrifice, if not 1, or 2, you're going to make a mistake. One of those rounds, you're going to make a mistake, and it's going to happen, and your opponent's going to find a loophole or a weakness where you didn't drag a guy off, and he's going to be able to hit him directly. Or, worst case scenario, he rolls a direct hit, and which can happen with Siege Engineer captains. So, anyway, Ballista, strength 9 hit, strength 5 follow-up, or 6, I'm sorry, 6 follow-up on all targets that get piercing through, if it happens. And that's the big threat to siege weapons is, what if they roll a 6? It can happen, especially if they have a siege engineer attached to it. So I think that a Siege Assault Ballista is worth it. If you're in a siege, then it's definitely worth it. The Raise the Ladders rule, not going to go into it because it's not standard game, but if it does happen, the Raise the Ladders is awesome. You should field it. So the next one we got is the Catapult from Mordor. The Mordor Catapult actually has a surprising 4-up accuracy for orcs. That's pretty good. I know it can switch its crew to Black Numenorians, but even with the Orc crew, they still get the 4-up accuracy, so I guess they have trackers manning the thing. Now, unlike the Trebuchet, it has a 6-inch area effect. Other than that, it's pretty much identical to the Trebuchet, but just better in terms of options it can carry. It can get a troll on it, which allows it to fire twice, which I think is awesome. The only problem with that is the troll can't move more than 6 inches away, and that's bittersweet. The thing is, if you have most of your army move back toward the troll, then the troll's going to get in that combat anyway. So I think that's fine, personally, but it kind of depends on you. You can play it where the troll just constantly fires, because the best part about it is, even if you spent the X amount of points for the troll, you can constantly fire no matter what point in the game it is, because you're evil and you don't care about a bunch of orcs. So kind of the perk of being evil, which is why I think the Catapult is better than the Trebuchet. It has the same effect as the Trebuchet, just better on the Mordor side. And the other thing is the Severed Heads. I think the severed heads is interesting. Now, technically, the severed heads makes the opponent take like broken tests, basically, within 2 inches instead of doing 2 inches of the target, instead of doing an actual strength 6 hit. And I think that this is worth it. Now, it says it only does it to good models. Most people translate this, like every other rule in the game, good and evil, those wordings, it's enemy models. So you can do it against, like, say, enemy orcs or enemy goblins, which is completely worth it, or even better, an enemy shade. I would love to make that thing take a broken test right in the middle of the game. So I think the catapult is worth it. I think its choices are obvious. They're easy. Its obvious weakness is the 18-inch minimum. So if you're causing problems from it, once again, just like the trebuchet, if you're being caused problems from it, move into it. Just charge into it. You're going to have to do it. And that's the best part about a trebuchet or indirect fire weapons like a catapult, trebuchet, is it makes your opponent do what they didn't want to do. So next we got the stone thrower. I think this one's kind of bittersweet. It's basically a ballista. I'm not going to spend too much time covering it because it's just a ballista, except it has 1d6 rather than 2d6 inch scatter. I guess because it's a heavier rock, but it only does a strength 9 hit, just like the other one. I know say only, like, oh, it's only one higher, it's 10. So, I mean, it's good, but compared to the ballista, once again, evil kind of wins out on its siege weapons. So I guess, despite dwarven craftsmanship, evil's just better at siege, warfare. So, I don't know. Do I think it's worth it in the dwarven ranks? I think, yeah. I think this is one that the dwarves don't really have all that much range, so if you're dealing with an enemy ranged army, I think it can be worth it to field these things. Once again, it's all about psychological impact. Your opponent's not going to want to keep dealing with this thing firing. Of course, if you roll 1 through 3 all the time, you're probably not going to deal with it at all. But I think it has a potential for spamming. If you're going to spam a bolt thrower, then you can certainly spam these. But the next on the list is actually the one where you really want to spam it, which is the Mordor siege bow teams. Now the siege bow teams, and this is where I talk about spamming a lot, siege bow teams don't really, they're not like super powerful or anything. They also do the 1d6 scatter. However, they cost a lot less than the dwarven stone thrower. And at their points cost, they can be easily spammed. If you get about 4 of them, which I know sounds insane, but dude, just think about it. You get 4 of them, and their average hitting of 5 up. I have seen this work. Just try it, okay? Try it before you absolutely bash it. I can understand a lot of people being like, dude, no, you're spending the points of like Radagast on an eagle for 4 things that can hit only 1/3 of the time. I have seen this work. It really is annoying as hell, and it can honestly just cut lines. I mean, you got lots of these things constantly cutting lines, and this is where I say these stone throwers kind of interesting. I say the siege bow is a lot less, but it's not like a huge margin less. If you get about 3 stone throwers, and this is where I say they should be spammed, it really is annoying as hell to have your army just blown through the ranks all the time. They're going to get their hits. Alright, with that many weapons firing at you, they're going to get their hits, and you just aim at targets, and with the 3-inch scatter, it's a lot harder to do that trick I told you about, where you just pull men kind of off to the side and take that scatter roll. It's a lot harder to do that, alright, because all the siege bow has to do is aim a little bit off center, and then suddenly you can't scatter onto your guy anymore, and you're having a problem. So when you're dealing with stuff like siege bows or spammed siege bows and spammed stone throwers, then obviously without a minimum range, moving into them isn't really so much an option. You have to kind of use their direct fire, the way they don't arc over anything. In this case, you just kind of have to maneuver in such a way. If all these siege bows and all these stone throwers and Avenger bolt throwers happen to be on a tower or something like that, then you just, once again, got to move into them. The scatter range will get to them. If they happen to be playing orcs, then you just hope their 5-up accuracy sucks enough where you don't have to deal with it. That's just pretty much the answer I have for you on that one. I fought against 4 siege bows, and that was just, he kept firing. As soon as I met the lines, he just kept firing these damn things, and I honestly had nothing I could do against him except for just butcher his ranks and hope he didn't get an incredible hit. See, the worst part is, when they're firing into combat, and this is why I say to use the siege bows, if your opponent's in combat with you and he scatters onto your units, well, you're just blowing back into his units. So that's the really cool thing about spamming these things, is that your orcs are so cheap that you still don't care about the fact of them dying, even though you just put a huge chunk of points into, you know, a bunch of siege bows. It works a little better than you might imagine. So the last siege weapon, which I can barely count as a siege weapon, but technically it is, and it just came out, so I might as well talk about it, is the Windlance. And I give it the award of the most god-awful siege weapon in the game. I can see what the designers tried to do. They really tried, but they missed out. So it has superior construction by default, has a hell of a range, and it has Bard attached to it by default. So it's kind of interesting in the fact that it's the only siege weapon that can be manned by a mounted crewman. It can only be manned by one crewman, so kind of hard to kill that crewman, but then again, you only get one of these things. You only get one, and because it has to be taken with Bard the Bowman, or Bard Savior of Lake Town, or whatever his surname is. And the thing is about it, though, even though it's 60-inch range, no minimum accuracy, it's a direct fire weapon, it does not have accurate. So if your opponent gets within 6 inches of you, which is really easy, then you no longer can fire this thing. And it doesn't have piercing shot. I don't know why. So basically, it's a scattering strength 10 crossbow bolt. If it was just a strength 10 crossbow bolt, let's say Games Workshop made it a siege weapon in the fact that it just sits there and it's just a strength 10 crossbow bolt, cool, awesome. But the fact that it has to scatter makes the weapon highly unreliable. You're basically forced to burn through Bard's Might in order to even use the weapon effectively. And then the whole thing about Smaug. The weapon was clearly intended to be used against Smaug so that it can kill him and one-shot him or two-shot him, however you want to interpret it, but you can't do it because Smaug just simply will engage your units. You have to fire in the shoot phase, and Smaug will see the Windlance and be like, oh, I just need to be within 6 inches of your men all the time. And that's really easy to do. So the Windlance, okay, how do I use it? I'm ragging on the thing, but how do you use it? I mean, honestly, you got to set your men back. Same thing as any other siege weapon. But ultimately, it relies on Bard burning through might, so you need Alfred. Alright, just burn through his might, and your chances are with the Windlance, you're only going to kill 2 things. That's it. You get probably 2 shots, and your opponent will be in your face with the thing, and then you need to do what Bard does best, which is get into combat and rally as a banner for the militia. So you got to do what he does best. In that case, you're going to have to just burn through his might and let Alfred give it back. As soon as the game starts, you pinpoint a target that you really want and just burn through it. And then use the black arrow, turn 2 minimum. Remember, with Bard, you're paying a hefty amount of points for his black arrow. So you got to use it. Otherwise, you just wasted the attempt. And the sad fact is, if you don't take the Windlance, then the black arrow is just paid for, and then you can't do anything with it because he doesn't have a bow. So you got to use it. You got to use it with the Windlance. Just spend that black arrow as fast as you can. Burn through the might. Do what you need to do. And, you know, I have played games where I have assassinated ring wraiths or a shaman or something. Now, the problem is, of course, the big thing in the room is, well, what about Fate? I can't do anything about Fate. It doesn't have piercing shots, so it's not like it's going to launch the guy away. It doesn't do anything else. So Fate, I guess what you can do is you can take advantage of the fact that it is an instant death weapon. Fire all your Lake Town shots at the model you're trying to fire at. Use a heroic accuracy if you got to get through in the ways and stuff like that. And then as soon as the guy has to take 1 or 2 fates and burns through his fate, fire the Windlance. It is an instant death weapon. Doesn't matter how many wounds it has. Take it down. If not, then just fire to the Balrog and make yourself satisfied with the fact that you made your points back double over. So yeah, Balrogs obviously, but great piece of Gorgoroth, Ents, Dwellers in the Dark, Trolls, anything like that. Just go ahead and fire it at them and burn through all your might. Boom. Your points have been made back by the fact that you just killed a monster. So I would think it's a monster hunter. That's what you should use it for. It's got more might than any other siege weapon. Even the normal siege captains only get 2, Bard gets 3. So this is pretty much my discussion on siege weapons. I hope you learned something, or I hope you kind of thought, hey, something new on how to use this type of siege weapon. Hopefully I've given you someone something. If not, if you have any questions about it, or if you completely disagree with me, let me know in the comments section below. Like and subscribe to the video. I'm certainly hoping that we can have more discussions like this raise more awareness for some different type of tricks you can do with the weapons. Honestly, a lot of these I did not come up on my own, so they're given to me. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have. Thanks for watching.